Sun National Bank is our very generous sponsor today, and it is my now very happy duty to introduce to you the man who made this all possible and agreed so readily, the President and CEO of Sun National Bank, Tom Geisel.
Thank you very much, Ruthie. I thought it would be a little gratuitous if I asked you to open up what was in front of you, but it was really important that you did that because as many of these events as we all go to, we know we do the old rip and throw with that kind of stuff, and we didn't want you to rip $10 in half and throw it in the garbage. Also, I don't want you to feel any pressure, but at our table, John Schreiber has already collected $80 for the NJPAC. So feel free as you walk by to contribute. It's our honor to be here today. I was in the men's room prior to coming into the event and getting my name tag, and one of the governors, and he will remain nameless, I mean, it does narrow it down when I say I was in the men's room, but it'll remain nameless, said, "What are we doing here?" And, you know, I was going to say something, but I think the bottom line is Ruthie asked us to be here. So we're all trying to figure out what we're doing here. I think in about 10 minutes we're gonna find out. But being a bank that does business in every single county in New Jersey, you know, we live and die by this state. And to have an opportunity to have so many of the movers and shakers and leaders in this room at one time, and to have a conversation with 30 years, almost 30 years of leadership on the gubernatorial side is absolutely fabulous. You know, this is, I think, a first of its kind event, and we're pleased and proud to be a sponsor, and we can't wait to get onto the program. Now, I am to introduce a man who needs no introduction, and he actually told me not to introduce him. So don't say anything about me, just introduce me. So without further ado, John Schreiber. John.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. And you follow directions beautifully, besides being a great sponsor. Thank you, Tom. I also want to thank Brendan Byrne, who is here, our great board member from PwC. They are also a sponsor of what will come. I'm going to be brief, but I want to say a couple of things that I think are important. Governor Tom Kean is here. Were it not for Governor Tom Kean, none of us would be here because it was his vision and his determination and his great love and care that thought of this idea and then, with the help of so many others, brought it to life. So first of all, Governor Kean, thank you for making this place possible. And I want to thank each of the governors for their role. They each know what they did. I just got here 2 years ago, so I am not the best historian. My great predecessor, Larry Goldman, is here, and he was shoulder to shoulder with Governor Kean and so many others when the Art Center was thought of and developed and then started to get built. But Larry and I were talking this morning, and Larry said to me that the cooperation of these governors, the support of these governors, was a remarkable example of how public-private partnerships work well when there's a common vision and a shared goal. So I want to thank each of the governors for each of your individual roles in making the Art Center a reality. Thank you, governors. So here we are, 16 seasons in, 7 million people, 7 million citizens have attended events here. Over 1 million kids have had arts learning experiences as a result of our arts ed programs, and it would not be were it not for these folks and many of you in the room, so I thank you for that. Just last week, we had 1,800 high school students from 26 different public schools in the area come to NJPAC, to Prudential Hall, to see the movie Lincoln on a 40-foot screen. All of them studied a curriculum about the 13th Amendment for 2 months in advance. We had Dr. Lonnie Bunch, who's the director of the Smithsonian African American History Museum, and we had Dr. Clem Price from Rutgers, and they did a talk back with the kids. But it was a remarkable morning because all those kids watched that movie with such care and such attention. it was not The Hangover 3 or Fast and Furious 6. It was Lincoln. That's not an easy watch. I mean, you have to concentrate. And so they did, and when they got to the part in the movie where they passed the amendment in Congress, 1,800 kids burst into cheers and applause. So it was a terrific and heartwarming morning for us, and that's just a small example of what we do every day here in Arts Learning. I want to thank our leadership who's here today, great members of our board. You know them. I want to name them and thank them for their support and their wisdom. Ann Borwick, Fletch Kramer, Brendan Byrne, Ronnie Goldberg, of course the governor, Tom Kean, Len Lieberman, Dr. Victor Parsonet, Jeff Sherman, Josh Weston, and Linda Willett. Thank you for being great board members. And Ann Limburg has just arrived from the Bank of America. Hi, Ann. How you doing? See what happens when you know, okay. So anyway, this event has gotten a tremendous amount of coverage. This morning it was all over the wires and stuff, and I got a call from Delaware about 20 minutes ago. They would really like to have these governors as their former governor, so they're willing to, they'd love them to appear in Wilmington on Saturday. So if you're game, you know, they could use a few governors in Delaware. So anyway, and now I want to introduce you to our host for the day and our moderator. He is a great guy. His name is John Mooney, and he is from New Jersey Spotlight. He's been a news reporter and editor for 30 years, the last 20 in New Jersey at the Bergen Record and at the Star Ledger. In May 2010, he helped found New Jersey Spotlight, an online news service focusing on public policy issues to New Jersey. And if you care about New Jersey politics, and each of you do, I know that's why you're here. I'm sure you read Spotlight, you read the Ledger, you read Politic, you read the Record. In 2011, Spotlight was awarded the prize for general excellence from the International Online News Association, and it recently won a first prize for public service from the New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists. He's a wonderful guy. He's a great reporter. His knowledge of all things New Jersey, politics, education, business is deep. Please welcome your host and your moderator, John Mooney.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is a great honor for me, and I can speak for the press table as well, for us folks who chase governors down streets and through press conferences. To get 5 of them sitting in front of us answering our questions is a great thrill, and I'm very excited to be part of it. With a cast such as this, though, on the stage, I think my biggest job will be to get out of the way, and I think you really want to hear from them. No small thing for somebody my size, but I want this to be a conversation among them, and hopefully my role here will be some ideas to talk about, and then leave it to them to go and maybe cut them off a little bit so we can get through it all. But a couple quick introductions. We'll go for about an hour. The first 45 minutes or so, I'll again spur some conversation among them, and then if we have some time at the end, we'll pass a mic around and allow for some questions. As I said, it really is meant to be not a place for them to, make speeches or a classic panel discussion, but more, 5 former governors who care deeply about this state, sitting around talking about some of the issues past, present, and future that the state faces. Of course, the group needs no introduction, but I'd like to say a couple words for each of them. Chronologically, and Brendan Byrne, who served as New Jersey's 47th governor from 1974 to 82, and while now retired, continues to be a powerful and important voice for the conscience of the state. And I'd like to each give a... Thomas Kean, the 48th governor from 1982 to 1990, went on to be president, of course, of Drew University, and has continued to serve the state and the nation in several capacities, including the 9/11 Commission and more recently chairing New Jersey's Higher Ed Task Force. James Florio, the 49th governor from 1990 to 1994, who since office has worked on several roles himself, including continuing to be a founding partner at Florio, Perucci, Steinhardt, and Fader, and makes me want to go back to college myself when I learned he's also been teaching a course at Rutgers Blaustein School as a senior fellow. Christie Whitman, the 50th governor of New Jersey from 1994 to 2001, went on to serve, of course, as the administrator of the EPA, and currently leads an energy and environment consulting business, the Whitman Strategy Group. And James McGreevey, the 51st governor from 2002 to 2004, who's been back in the news of late for his work with the Integrity House in terms of addiction treatment programs for female inmates. I might add, he's also the only one, I think, on the dais who's been subject of an HBO movie. So let's get them talking. I called around to some friends and journalists, including a few in this room, about, what should I ask this group, and they had the usual suggestions, ask them about their biggest accomplishments, regrets, things like that. Sounded nice, but on the topic of accomplishments, I want to add a little bit of a twist. And I'm going to ask each of you former governors, to think of the governor who succeeded you, the one who came in to office after you, some of whom you ran against. And tell us something he or she did that you really admired, having sat in their seat, sat in that chair, something they did, decided, enacted, even just said, that caught your attention as the right thing. And let me start with Governor Byrne.
I didn't hear the question.
All right. Speak to your successor and something he did that really you admired. Yeah, this guy down here. Yeah, that you really thought was great, having been in that job yourself.
He did a lot of things I admire.
Just one or two.
One, he used the same photographer to take a picture for the official portrait.
Yeah, very good.
Second, he used the same superintendent of the state police that I did. A lot of things.
Perfect.
But he maintained, I think, the sense of integrity in government that I was proud of, and I think he is proud of. And even without mentioning his achievements in the field of education, for which he is famous, he did a lot of good things.
Very good. Governor Kean? Like to speak to your successor?
Yeah, this have to come out. Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah. Jim Florio did a number of good things, but if I'm going to say the things I liked best, I had a lot of good ideas when I was governor. And I got them started. We did the Camden Aquarium. We started Liberty Science Center and got that going in Jersey City. This wonderful place we're sitting in here. But, I just got them started. Jim had to finish them. And that's the more difficult task. Because in a difficult budget time, he had to come up with the money and the resources and the enthusiasm to finish all those things that I got the credit for starting. So I'd like at this point to say, thank you for giving me the credit, but Jim deserves a lot of that credit also.
Very good. Very good. Governor Florio.
Well, obviously, Governor Whitman did a lot of interesting things. One of the things that was particularly relevant as far as I was concerned in terms of the value systems was a commitment to try to preserve as much open space as possible. Green Acres program, things of that sort. And that continues as something we should be doing even more so even now. But she was very much committed to that, and I think the state is infinitely better off as a result of that focus in terms of trying to preserve open space in the most densely populated state in the Union. The combination of that initiative and Governor Byrne's initiative on the Pinelands, Governor McGreevey's initiative on the Highlands really goes to a problem that we have in New Jersey that really is going to take a lot of effort to try to cope with.
Very good. Governor Whitman.
Well, Governor Florio mentioned what Governor McGreevey did on the Highlands, which I thought was extraordinarily important, and it was continuing something that is going to provide a real legacy for the people of the state of New Jersey. One of the things you asked us before, though, was to contemplate some of the most difficult decisions that the previous the subsequent governor had made. And I have to applaud Governor McGreevey for doing what he thinks was right. I wish he hadn't, because I don't think he had to, and that was to decide he needed to resign. I appreciate and admire the courage it took to do that, but I know that his passion for the state made that a very difficult decision, because there's nothing, this governorship has an extraordinary ability to make change and make positive change, and his passion and commitment to New Jersey and to making positive change for the people of the state means that that was an extraordinarily difficult decision in my mind for him to have to, for him to have to take, and I think it took a lot of courage to do that, and I applaud him for it, even though I wish he hadn't felt he had to do it.
No? Governor McGreevey, I told you to loop around and to speak to Governor Byrne, but do you want to respond to what?
Just, Governor Whitman, as always, is most gracious, and I just, on a heartfelt level, say thank you. I'd also like to, I mean, I'm blessed to be up here on this dais, and I think what's unique is the shared experience, in many respects, also some of the shared emotions that we all enjoy. And if I can, before I recognize what I consider to Governor Byrne's great legacy, is also to recognize Governor Christie for two things that I think are critically important. One is the expansion of drug court, which will provide enhanced treatment for addicts as opposed to incarceration, and the Rutgers restructuring. And as to Governor Byrne's numerable achievements, I think the Pinelands is something that's very special. It marks, I think, the beginning of an environmental stewardship that Governor Kean, that Governor Whitman, that Governor Florio, that all of us adhere to. And I think that was first seen in the mindset of Governor Byrne.
Very good. I wanted to ask, spur some conversation a little bit around some of the issues that really transcended all five of you and continue to be a real struggle for the state. And you know, there's a couple of them, and again, my reporter friends threw out a few of them, but one, I've covered education in the state for 20 years, and urban education reform has been, you know, none of you are strangers to Abbott versus Burke, the famous school equity case that continues to this day as a driving force in education policy. But each of you, whether forced by the courts or not, have come up with initiatives around charter schools, school construction, school takeovers, all dealing with trying to improve our urban schools, which, to be honest, still struggle to this day, mightily in many ways. And lots of questions are being asked about how we fund them and the like. And I'm curious, for any of you, and this, you know, this is an open question that each of you can take, or a few of you can take, would you have done anything differently, knowing what we know now, the struggles they continue to have, the questions of how much money they should have? Is there any of those decisions that you made back then, even Governor Kean, where you led the takeover of Jersey City schools 20 years ago, any of those decisions that you might have done differently around urban education, knowing what you know now?
Yes.
Could you expound?
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you one. I think all of us have been enormously frustrated by the lack of progress for kids in urban areas. And to go into some of those schools and see what I used to call educational child abuse, where people were in schools for 10 years and learnt nothing at all, was one of the most frustrating things I think all of us felt. Out of my frustration came the bill for a school takeover. And I'll tell you what I do differently. I wouldn't listen to the lawyers anymore.
Huh.
Because...
The lawyers aren't clapping, but anyway.
No, I'll tell you what I wanted to do. I wanted to do it under the gubernatorial powers and simply under the emergency affecting the schools, just simply take them over without going through the legislature, frankly. And the same way I think Brendan did with, you did, and I did with the wetlands. I want to declare a state emergency as far as urban kids go and do it. The lawyers said, that's totally unconstitutional, you can't do that. And I said, but the kids that are thorough and efficient, the courts are telling us what to do. Under thorough and efficient, I should be able to do this. And they said, no, you can't. So we went through the legislature, and the bill got weakened substantially. And then it got challenged by Jersey City in the courts, and it got weakened some more. And so by the time it actually went into effect and I was leaving office and Jim had to deal with it, it wasn't the same idea that I started with. I since talked to a couple of retired state Supreme Court justices and said, what would you have done if I had simply said, we're going to take over the schools in Jersey City and run them for the benefit of kids instead of adults? And both of them said, we would have welcomed it. So that was a terrible missed opportunity. I mean, because if we'd been able to use all the things I knew about school education reform, use that as a sample district, and really have the power beyond school boards, beyond teachers, but all of that, just in the interest of the kids, we might have done something of very important, not only to the state, but the country. But I listened to the lawyers, and I shouldn't have.
There you go. Governor Whitman?
I just wanted to echo what Tom said in wishing that he hadn't listened to the lawyers, because we did the takeover of Newark while I was governor. And because the law had been weakened, we weren't able to institute the kind of changes that really were needed to make the substantive lasting difference. And so we had to go through a whole lot of different procedures to try to get there. And charter schools was something we did, but it had to be separate through the legislature to try that kind of an experiment. And they only allowed, well, they allowed 21 of the magnet schools and just a few more of the charter schools, which wasn't enough to really see how they were going to work unless you were in a situation where you had taken over the whole school district and were able to really implement it. It's those kinds of changes that would have been wonderful to have been able to have done. And I know that the Kean administration, followed by the Florio administration, would have taken full advantage of the authority, had it been there, to truly make a difference in these urban schools, because along with Governor Kean, we spent time up here, particularly here, working on the schools themselves, just cleaning up the outside play areas so kids could go outside and parents didn't have to worry they were coming home with sliced knees because of broken bottles, or they could use a bathroom and not have to worry about the ceiling leaking. The circumstances under which children were trying to learn were overwhelming and difficult, and it would have been wonderful.
Let me follow up. It's covering Newark schools now, continues to be roiled. They're back in court fighting the takeover. I think we're almost at 20 years. As the governor who was there at the beginning, what is your reaction to that? This is something, one of the criticisms is there was no exit strategy to the state taking control of schools, and that continues to be a struggle, certainly in Newark, where you have a very rancorous debate. Looking back, what do you think of what's going on in Newark now in the schools? Yourself, Governor Whitman.
Oh, me?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Follow up with you.
Looking over my head. It's a frustration. The first superintendent we put in here, actually the first two superintendents we got to come in here, suffered death threats. They had people demonstrating outside their homes, telling them that they shouldn't and couldn't do this, and that the state was wrong to have done it. And unfortunately, we haven't seen the advancement in education that I would have hoped that we would have seen by now. And I don't think they're ready for the getting out from state takeover. But unfortunately, again, because of the way the law has been written, the state doesn't have the ability to force the kinds of changes that I think are the ones that really need to be made, that are yet to be made in this school system.
Others want to speak to some of these? All of you have tried to tackle, and including yourself, Governor Byrne, with the first income tax was somewhat in response to meeting the edicts of the court. Knowing what we know now, is maybe some approaches any of you have taken differently?
Me?
Sure.
No, but I wish some of my successors would do something that they haven't done, and that is to pay for what they buy. We had last year a bond issue of $750 million. It's a good bond, excellent bond issue, but we didn't pay. We never intended to pay for it. I was asked to co-chair a committee to promote that bond issue. I said, yes, I will promote it. How are you going to pay for it? They never intended to pay for it. They have not intended to pay for any bond issue they've issued in recent years. Never intended to pay for our bond issue. And it's going until we lose the bond rating entirely. I don't think that makes any sense at all. And I don't think it should be tolerated. But it is. Anybody, Tom Kean and I can brag that we had a AAA bond rating while we were governor. AAA. It's nowhere near that now. And it's threatened to be downgraded again. Nobody listening to me now is really excited about so what.
Speaking at the end of the table, you're among his successors. I did want to ask about finances.
It's going to come back to bite you. That's all I'm saying.
Finances is the state of the state budget is dire, and it's a long-running issue, and governors have grappled with it, and pension payments, bond indebtedness, transportation trust funds. Real questions of whether our tax system, as it stands now with property taxes, is sustainable. What do we need now? You guys have been in that seat. Is it time for a real change in how we pay for our government?
We've got to get people interested. Well, simple question. How are you going to pay for this? How are you going to pay for it?
How are we? Governor McGreevey?
And when you raise that question, today's climate, you raise that question, you don't get an answer, you don't get a response, you don't get nothing.
Do you want to?
And only I get excited, so what's the difference?
That's good. This is your chance.
What's the question?
Well, speak to the state of public finances in New Jersey and the need or not for some major tax reform in how we pay for state and municipal government and schools.
Well, one of the things that's changed dramatically over the years that we span is the fact that the economy has changed dramatically. I mean, I can remember going to automobile manufacturing plants in New Jersey. Edison plant, Ford plant in Edison, GM plant in Linden, going to pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities in the state, no longer exist. So our system was geared to a manufacturing economy. We're now a service-oriented economy, and we have not changed the system. We should really change this so as to be able to get taxes where you should be getting taxes, as opposed to the system we have now. And there's lots and lots of things that we've done. Going back to the school issue, the school issue goes back even beyond Governor Kean. Governor Cahill, the first case was Robinson versus Cahill on the inequities of school funding. The Supreme Court was very candid in saying they didn't know what thorough and efficient meant, but they did know that good school districts were affluent districts, and therefore they wanted to say money must be a factor, and therefore we'll try to bring money up. Well, that's no longer an excuse, because we now know what thorough and efficient means. It means preschool, it means quality teachers, it means adequate school facilities. All those things entail money. And I'm always interested when people say, well, dollars are not a real consideration. Usually the people who say that are the people that have dollars. So the fact of the matter is we really do have to invest smartly. We have to put resources because, if you think the cost of education is bad, where do you find out the cost of ignorance? And if we're going to have a good state going forward, we really have to invest in the schools that are not performing in the way that they should be performing.
You want to follow up?
Just on that point, it was not a good court decision, and I'll tell you why. Because what it did is it set the state for 30 or more years on the path of saying all you had to do for urban education is increase money. And every year we increase money. Over 30 years we increased money, and at the end of that 30 years, the test scores were lower than when we started. Because everybody who's worked in school reform knows money is a piece of it, but only one piece of it. And unless you do the others, it doesn't work. So we wasted we spent more than any other state in the country on poor kids in those years. And the poor kids didn't get educated. And that is a shame. And it wasn't until the last Supreme Court decision, finally somebody said, and it was Gary Stein, somebody writing said, yeah, and you've got to put some school reform into the process. You've got to have things like early childhood education. The shame is that we know what to do. If you read the Carnegie reports, even what's not being done by the Department of Education and the Obama administration, we know what to do now. We're just not doing it. When I was there, we were feeling around. We were trying things. Now we know what to do. And the fact we're still not doing it is the great shame of education in this country, and particularly because we're spending so much money in this state.
Governor McGreevey?
Yeah, I just have the privilege of working with incarcerated women. And what I find so terribly frustrating is that every day we read verses from Psalms in the King James Bible, and that these women are unable to read the most basic and arguably beautiful scriptural language in the English language. As Governor Kean said, we recognize that urban education was failing and failing abysmally. And frankly, if education was failing so miserably for white, affluent children, we would have had a revolution. Best practices. We know what works and we know what doesn't work. The problem is we're tied to a structure and to a system that is ossified and preserves the status quo at the expense of entrepreneurial efforts. And when you see what Mayor Bloomberg has done in New York City, we understand that we need more experimentation. We need to challenge ourselves. And I see my dear friend Jamie Foxx, when we thought about challenging the Supreme Court on certain school districts that had not yet spent the money to which we had already allocated, and we were told no. So I defer to Governor Kean, to paraphrase Shakespeare, to kill all the lawyers. But the point is that we as a state ought not tolerate what is an unacceptable condition. And speaking for myself, you become inured to the status quo. But the point is every child is capable of learning. And as Governor Florio said, the cost of not educating these children at $45,000 a year at incarceration for an extended period of time is so much more woeful. And I just think collectively in this room, with this legislature, with this governor, we could do better now, and we ought not accept. This isn't mediocrity. We're failing these children.
I want to move to a new topic, but Governor Whitman, you want to...
Just two quick comments on that. First of all, is it's about the only system I can think of in the country that we have where the worse you do, the more money you get, without anything else, any other requirement on top of it, just more money. And the second is, to Governor McGreevey's point, one of the most exciting things to see is if you go down to Camden to the LEAP Academy, to see what's happening down there, it is just extraordinary how well these kids are doing. And if that doesn't reaffirm to you, it doesn't matter what a child's background is, where their family comes from, what their race is. Any child can learn if you give them the opportunity, and we just are failing them miserably because we're not giving them the structure and the opportunity so that they can succeed in the future. And as Governor Florio has said, the price of that failure is going to be enormous over time.
I want to ask a question also on the broad topic of education, but the big education news in New Jersey right now is taking place at Rutgers. And what is happening with their athletic department and obviously the struggles that are going on many levels. And I wanted to ask each of you, all of you have some ties with Rutgers and certainly recognized as our flagship. How's it going to fare through this? As governor, we've had, frankly, our current governor has been pretty hands-off on this, and for a guy who's not hands-off on much, he's actually stepped back a little bit on this topic. What should he be doing? What would you be doing? What's your reaction to everything? It is dominating the news right now. Any of you want to speak to the state of Rutgers right now?
Yeah. All right, look. I'll start.
Go.
Okay, look. First of all, you want to go ahead, Brendan.
Rutgers was well chosen. I think he's doing a good job, and I think he has not done all of the things he could have done, but he's done most of them, and he's done them well. And I'm proud to have Barachi as a friend. and as a public servant. And there are people who will criticize anything and anybody. That's a sport in New Jersey.
That can be true, yes. You want to, Governor Kean?
Yeah, look, first of all, we've got to get our priorities straight. What's going on, I don't know if people realize it, what's going on right now in trying to put together the med school and Rutgers will turn Rutgers into one of the top 10 research universities in the entire country. It'll make Rutgers something that every one of us is going to be proud of. It's going to take Rutgers from where it is now, which is good, and make it great. And that's the ball we got to keep our eye on. Not the basketball or any other kind of ball, but that ball. And I think, honestly, if I was the governor, I don't quite say things the way the governor, but in this case, I'd say to the politicians, shut up about this issue. It's not to have every politician advising what to do at this point is not helpful. I think as far as the media goes, it doesn't deserve the front pages of the papers right now. You can follow it. Were the mistakes made? I think so, but that's not what's important. Let Rutgers alone. Rutgers will clean up its problems if it's just left alone. If everybody's trying to get at it from every different direction, it's not only not going to help this situation, but it's going to get in way of the big situation, which is turning Rutgers into the greatest university it can possibly be.
Governor Whitman?
I just want to reiterate that you know, sometimes we get all caught up in the glamorous side of it, which tends to be the sports. And frankly, there are more important things going on. We have an extraordinary president now at Rutgers who I think deserves a chance. He only started in September. I mean, he really hasn't had the opportunity to be on top of all of this because he had an enormous merger for which he was given primary responsibility. And to me, this is all part of what I worry about so much in our governance today is everything is turned into partisan politics. And how do I score another point? And I think a lot of the people that are sounding off now, and you hear see all these leaks in the press and everything, are people trying to make a political point, not looking at the policy. And the big policy is we've got to make Rutgers the best it can be, and this kind of press every day is not helping. It is just not helping the university on what's really important, which is making this merger work, and that's going to be difficult enough, believe me.
Governor Florio?
Well, as to the role of the governor, it's a fine line that any governor has to walk. Obviously, we want to know the governor's thoughts on things, but to the degree that we do not want to have political interference in the operation of an institute of higher education, you have to be very careful and cautious as to how you become involved in that, because we do not want to have questions raised about the integrity of the higher education system in New Jersey. Changes that some people are calling for at this point would be, I think, very harmful to Rutgers. We've gone through this period of change now over the last last year or so. And I assume that the president that was hired because of his skill in the medical field is going to be a very essential component of integrating UMDMJ into Rutgers, which is extremely important for the institution as well as for New Jersey. So I would be very cautious about calling for changes at the top level.
Governor McGreevey?
To echo what I think we heard from Governor Kean and Governor Whitman and Governor Florio, when Dr. Vagelos, former CEO of Merck, began the process of evaluating the reconfiguration of our state university system, to paraphrase Governor Kean, is to create a world-class research-based university. We ought to care as much about biochemistry and telecommunications and plastics research and transportation systems as much as we do about sports. And I'd also like to echo what Governor Whitman said, that we ought to loathe to lapse into a Twitter mentality where we all engage in a widespread plebiscite as to every decision every public official makes. What's loathsome is, and I share some of this responsibility, is frankly the diminished resources to state higher education. That's what we ought to care about. Because as Governor Florio said, as we shift from manufacturing to research and technology, It is our ability to have a world-class educational system. When you look how pharma is fleeing or leaving to go to, whether it's Research Triangle, Duke, UNC in North Carolina, or Harvard, MIT up in Boston and Cambridge, we need to make sure that quality research-based education, sciences, medical sciences, physics, chemistry is at the top. So again, I think what Governor Whitman said was of particular concern. We ought to sit back, allow an excellent CEO do what he ought.
Fair to say, I'm being a reporter here, a vote of confidence for the current president of Rutgers from all of you, it sounds like. Let me jump to, we're talking about the governor a little bit. Each of you has run a campaign or two in your time. Put yourselves in the shoes of a campaign advisor to a certain governor who's running for re-election this fall, and hypothetically, I know hypothetically might be running for president in 2016. What advice would you give him in both of those campaigns? And if I can indulge you, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what advice would you give his opponents in each of those campaigns. I know, Governor Byrne, you've already had some comments for in the public for
Somebody asked
Barbara
Yogi Berra one time how they pitched to Ted Williams. And he said, we threw 4 balls and hoped to pick them off first. I don't know that you can get any advice which is better than that in how to win from the current government.
So wait for you.
I'm not being.
Can you move the mic a little closer? Just.
I'm not being anything but. Thanks. But I don't think that that is advice that's going to be helpful.
Others on either advising Governor Christie or advising his opponents, you know, I think this election there's a lot of thoughts on his chances there. But even as he runs, as some might say, some predict he will for president in 2016.
I think he knows what he has to do, and he has to concentrate his job here. That's what he's running for election for. And frankly, if you don't do the job you're in well, the next ones don't come along so easily. And he knows that, and that's where his focus is. And I think that's all the advice that he would ever need for anything. Right now, focus on this race, focus on the state of New Jersey, and once you get elected, continue to focus on the state of New Jersey and make it the success that we all want it to be because we live here and love it.
Others? Governor Florio?
Well, I don't understand Democratic politics anymore, so I sure as heck don't understand Republican politics. But I will share with you advice actually that I did give the governor. The first year he came in, after about 7 or 8 months, I was sitting in my backyard on a Saturday afternoon reading a book, and the phone rang, and it was the governor. And he said, oh, how are you? I said, how are you? And I said, you got any advice for me? And I'm assuming he was making calls to appropriate people, people he want to get some advice. I said, well, the only thing I would say is that when I was in office, when I had political opponents, I tried to give them some option other than killing me. And he persisted that was not his style, which he's since proved.
Any advice to those running against him?
Well, keep in mind, in 1973, I didn't get into the gubernatorial race because people told me I could not beat Bill Cahill. And it was only with 6 or 7 days left that I got into it. And Cahill didn't even make it to the final.
Other thoughts on our governor?
When I ran against Bill Bradley, there was going to be absolutely no chance. You know, he'd won his last reelect by 16 percentage points, and there was no money coming in. Nobody wanted. In fact, the National Senatorial Campaign Committee took away the last monies that they promised us because they said there were other races where they thought the challengers would do better. Turned out no other challenger did better, and we came within 2 or 3 percentage points. The point only being you don't give up because the odds look overwhelming. In a democracy, you want to have a challenge. You want to have 2 candidates. You want to have options. That's the whole point of our system, and we've just got to understand that means we need to vote people.
Do you think this governor has a good chance, at least for the Republican nomination in 4 years?
If he does a good job in the state of New Jersey,
You
absolutely.
think he does? Others, his odds?
He's the most popular politician in the country today. If he comes out of this election with a huge majority in a blue state like New Jersey, they should be coming to him. Now, my party is nuts today. So whether they will come to him, I don't know. But if he comes out of a blue state with the kind of margins he may, with the kind of skills that we all know he has, then they should be beating a path to his door. Now, whether he receives them or not, it's up to him. But I don't know another candidate in the country who has more potential.
One of the things he has, I mean, you know, obviously is, as you say, enormous popularity nationally and even on some issues in New Jersey. And along the way, he has been somewhat critical of some of his predecessors. One of them is not here today, but even those who preceded Governor Corzine on the state of the finances that he says he was left with. And I'm curious your reactions to that and to his larger-than-life persona. I mean, this is a guy who has, you know, become Mr. Jersey. And, you know, and sometimes he has been critical of those who've come before him. How do you guys react as having sat there?
We were all critical of those who came before us.
Yeah, good.
That's what you do when you get into office, even though.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I love him now.
And we all had budget problems and budget issues. I mean, that's a standard thing that you talk about.
Speak to those issues, though. I mean, is it valid criticism that the state, I mean, and even Governor Byrne brought it up, that the state has borrowed for much of what it's spent and put off pension costs, and not all of you, but some of you have been accused of being guilty of that. Speak to those concerns.
Well, of course they're real. I mean, they are
That is an
very
issue,
important.
by the way.
It's a real issue. When you work with these things, you've got to understand, and to the extent that you try to help local municipalities and give them a break on things, that you have to watch the numbers coming in, and you have to be willing to adjust your budget. I remember right before I left, we had a $1.2 billion surplus that we left, but and things happened in the interim year between myself and Governor McGreevey that changed some of those numbers. But we had recast the numbers twice to recognize the fact that we didn't think revenues were coming in the way they should. We'd gotten 2 upgrades from Wall Street, and things were going well at the time. The state was doing well, but the national economy was doing well. And I think we have to understand that really has had an impact as well, that we are not as a country coming out of the recession the way we have in the past. And this is a very slow recovery, albeit a recovery. And you've got to factor that into the assumptions that you make when you put the budget together. And it is a real concern.
At heart,
as we speak, has $34 billion worth of bonded debt. $34 billion. I could have run the state for the rest of the century on $34 billion. And there's $3 billion of it guaranteed. But it's a lot of bonded debt. And they're about to put another $200 million on the ballot for next year without any way of funding it. We just have an atmosphere, an attitude of like somebody said, in New Jersey, if you're not getting something for nothing, you're not getting your fair share.
Yeah.
I wish I thought that was just New Jersey.
Yeah.
Governor Kean, did you want to?
Yeah, as Governor Whitman just whispered to me, that's a problem for the rest of the country as well. I mean, New Jersey's not in this alone. Yeah. But in New Jersey, yeah, we've got too much bonded indebtedness, and a lot of those bonded indebtedness was issued not through bonds voted on by the people, but in other ways. And so we build up a great bonded indebtedness without having a public vote in a number of ways, and that's got to be addressed. But the whole taxing structure is wrong. I mean, everybody knows we're over-reliant on the property tax because we've got a huge number of municipalities that won't share services, that won't combine, and that's probably the biggest problem out there that's correctable. about doing something about the property tax, but our income tax. We're much too reliant on the income tax. And because that's volatile, because people, if you have an income tax with the kind of rates we do, it's very volatile at the top levels because you've got a lot of investment income, so when Wall Street goes down, income tax goes way down and governors get into trouble. You can't predict that ahead of time. So it's mal-structured. The income tax we're too reliant on it. The rates are too high compared to neighboring states. We're having a huge drain of people who pay that income tax who are moving out of the state. And as they move out of the state, their responsibilities, tax-wise, have to be taken up by those of us who remain. And it's a game we're not going to win. It's a game we're going to lose over the long term unless we find a way to address that income tax and make it more comparable, frankly, with other states. One thing I used to tell my people when we were doing tax policy, make sure that New Jersey's taxes stay just below, not the southern states, stay a little below Connecticut, stay a little below New York, stay a little below Delaware and Pennsylvania. And if we do that, we'll be just fine. And as long as we did that, we had a lot of jobs flowing in. We're not doing that anymore. Now we're among the highest tax rates in the country, and jobs have been flowing out. And that's a problem.
I think we were going to open this up for some questions. I don't know how we were going to, we have a mic. Okay, where are the, right in front. That's you.
I got it. Each of the governors has pointed out before that we know what to do about education. We're just not doing it. With good intention, I'll call those general platitudes. So I ask you to point some fingers as to who should be doing what that they're not doing. Otherwise, I don't think we'll leave this room much more informed than we were on that subject when we came into the room.
Anyone want to tackle that one?
Do you want the list?
Yeah.
Short list.
You know Josh better than anybody else what those things are. And frankly, if Josh had been in charge of things, they might be a lot different because he has gotten into all these things. But you start with the leadership of the school. Principals. I mean, principals have got to be trained much better than principals are trained right now. They're the educational leaders. We're not training principals the way we should. And that goes to superintendents as well. They're not in the classroom. They're often, you see them often on the athletic field if you're a teacher. Teachers have got to be trained much better. A lot of training institutions in this country are shameful in the products they produce. They're not really producing the kind of teachers, particularly teachers who are designed to get at the most difficult kind of kids to teach. They're just not doing it. You know about early childhood education. We should be doing more of that, not less of that. Middle school is a great hole right now. We don't quite know what's happening. But we know that a lot of people who get started with Head Start and a number of other programs, that advantage disappears when they get to middle school, and nobody's paying much attention to middle school. So that's an area we've got to deal. We've got to have a much better connection between higher education and the schools, which is starting in some areas slightly, but every higher education institution should be connected with the schools, because we know right now that most people who get into college have to have a whole remediation, usually going on for at least a year or two before they're even college ready. I mean, there's more.
Let me follow. Does the buck stop with the governor? Does the buck stop with the legislature on not demanding these things? I mean, I don't know if you're asking for specific names, but where I think there's general agreement on what some best practices are, but they're still not happening.
Well, there has to be some legislative change. There have to be some legislative changes, frankly, to allow, if somebody is going to be really, truly in charge and able to make the kind of changes that need to be made, there have to be some legislative changes that will allow them to do that. And unfortunately, we've seen that the pushback, when you try for that, for expanded powers, is enough to derail it almost every time. And it's an enormous frustration because we don't have the flexibility within the governor's office or the executive branch to be able to really force some of the changes at the school levels, starting with the superintendent, starting with the districts. It's pervasive, and it needs to go through everyone. But without those legislative changes that allow you to make some changes, frankly, okay, I'll say it, the unions. We had a huge problem when we were trying to make some changes. And I can remember one instance where we were making a change, doing mentoring, trying to get, because what we do is we take new teachers just straight out of educational institutions and throw them into some of our toughest schools and say, see you in the spring. And that really wasn't very helpful. They were feeling overwhelmed, they were leaving, and so we said, we want to have a mentoring program. We want the schools to identify the best teachers and have them agree to mentor the new teachers. I want to tell you, though, what we had to go through with the unions to get that accepted was just mind-boggling to me. It was pretty easy. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. You get some resistance to change every step of the way. I mean, that's natural, that happens, but I think we have to understand we also have to have the kind of legislative flexibility or the powers given to the Department of Education and the executive branch to be able to force some of these changes.
One other response to that, and then take another question.
There may be some structural changes that have to be undertaken on a big scale level. I recently had a meeting with some people from Moody's, and we were lamenting New Jersey's fiscal situation, but the observation was made that New Jersey is not the worst off state. I mean, Illinois, Michigan, California has some problems now. So that this is something that's unique, not unique to New Jersey. And therefore, trying to deal with these problems, much of which is about resources, doing on a state-by-state basis, may not be the way we have to deal with these things. We have to change fundamentally the federal system, getting more responsibilities to a higher level of financing, which obviously is not going to be easy at the federal level, but to the degree that we can't have the municipality or the states doing smart things to their detriment in competitive positions with adjoining states. So it may be that at some point down the road, we've got to talk about the federal level, assuming more of the responsibilities. That would entail some sort of a broad-based funding system, value-added tax, carbon tax, something of that sort, selling that through a revenue-sharing system, assuming responsibilities for Medicaid would take a big burden off of the states, things of that sort. So I think it's frustrating because we've talked about these same problems for the last 30 years that I know about. And we're trying to get something out of something that can't possibly be done. So it may very well be you have to think a different way about things and start doing what many other nations are doing, which are nationalizing some of these problems. We have national curriculum that we're talking about. We don't want to have environmental laws, one level of clean water in West Virginia, another level of clean water in New Jersey. We want to have national standards. So it may very well be that you have to think about the delivery of services in a different way than we have in the past.
No. Let's do this. Let's look at what happens on a day-to-day basis. And let's look at what we can do to influence what's happening. Now, just recently, the legislature or somebody passed a statute that said that the Department of Environmental Protection can eliminate any of the rules that govern the pineland. Any rules. Nobody is excited about that. No? If you can get excited about things like that, you can change. That's where you can make changes. And I ask you to leave here with the determination to have your voice. If you have a voice, if you don't want the pineland, that's all right. I'm going to be gone. And what happens? But if you are interested, you got to fight. You got to fight. Pinelands is an issue every day. Every day, it's an issue. And so, and it's an issue in which you have an influence and can have an influence. If the people in this room said, we're not going to let you influence upon that one pineland at a time, it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen.
Next question, I'm going to let me just, Jim McGreevey wanted to add one thought on that and then be ready to go.
We'll just go to the question.
Okay, all right. Yep, question.
Governor Florio just touched on it, but I'll ask the question specifically. On the issue of public finance, should we be thinking about moving away from the existing tax structure to a value-added tax at the state level? One could certainly have it at the federal level with a formula to reallocate some of the greater revenues to the states. But should we be thinking about it at the state level?
No. that because what it would do, it may bring in more revenue, but it'll provide an excuse for someone to say, I'm going to wherever, Wyoming. So you really can't do it on a state-by-state basis because you find competitive disadvantages built in for doing the right thing in many instances. So you really do have to have a broad-based system at the national level so you don't have this competition, environmental competition, who can have dirtier air permitted. That would be the result of that sort of thing.
Others want to speak to? No? Questions? We had President Cole. I think, wait for the mic.
Not Governor Cole.
No, not
now or ever. I have had 6 governors since during my presidency as Montclair State University, and many would argue that 6 governors is more than any president should be blessed with. My 2 favorites are on the stage, and they're, of course, only 2 of the 6 who are here today, but they still were my favorites. My question to the governors is this. We've talked a lot about K-12 education. We all know that in New Jersey we spend more per student on K-12 than almost anywhere else in the country. For years and years we have endured the fact that that money has not bought us what we hoped it would buy us in terms of quality in certain areas of the state. At the same time, during the years of these 6 governors that I've had, I have argued as vociferously as I could that the state has failed to put an equitable investment into higher education, and particularly into public higher education in this state. I've made that argument in every way that I can. I have brought many friends to make the argument. I have heard Governor Kean make that argument vociferously. Very few people in the state, I think, are even conscious of the fact that the vast majority of students educated in public institutions in the state are not educated at Rutgers. And yet, all we can think about is Rutgers and, as you all said, basketball at Rutgers, which is the least important thing about Rutgers, an institution that I am extremely fond of, having spent many years helping to build it. My question is this: why has it been so difficult in this state, which is so dependent on a knowledge economy, so dependent on that, I mean, we don't have oil, to make the point that New Jersey must invest in higher education, public higher education for the people? I have never succeeded in making that argument, and believe me, I've tried, and I've tried it with 6 governors.
But you have to admit you have gotten more money from time to time. There has been more money put in higher education, and there has been more money put in the community college system, which I happen to feel is a very important, often overlooked part of the system. So, I mean, I can't speak to what's happening today, but over time, has everybody had all that they want? No. That hasn't happened, obviously. We have a lot of higher education institutions in the state. I would argue that I think people are aware of that. I certainly think that they are aware of the importance of higher education and the role it plays here in the state of New Jersey, but I'll let the other governors speak to that as well. But I do think, frankly, at least from the period of time with which I'm most familiar, higher education did receive some more dollars, and particularly the community colleges, because that was a part that had been very much overlooked and yet is such a critical part of our overall education profile.
I think the argument could be made even more forcefully for better investments in higher education if we had something like a higher education master plan. We have sort of the irrational competition among the facilities around the state. If we had the ability to go say, we have a plan, we want to rationally allocate resources in a way that would be cost effective to the fullest extent, we'd make a better argument. Every time we have a bond issue, there is this competition, political competition. I saw one of the colleges just protested that they were left out. They didn't get enough money allocated out of that facility. And I think we don't have a higher education department anymore, so there is no institutional advocate for higher education. We would be able to have that advocacy for the institution of higher education if we had a plan that would allocate those resources in a sensible way.
Another question, I think, yep.
Yes, I want to follow up on the question of higher education and observe that in my lifetime, certainly, public higher education has expanded enormously, in part because of your own contributions. I would observe also that the independent colleges in New Jersey graduate as many people every year as Rutgers. But the growth of higher education in the public sector, of course, has been so large that it causes me to ask you, especially Governor Kean, are you concerned that the massive government expansion of public tax-supported higher education is causing an imbalance, which will sooner or later put the independent, non-tax-supported colleges and universities at an enormous disadvantage and hurt New Jersey?
No. Look, first of all, we have not only not increased funding as it should be increased for higher education, we've defunded higher education over the years. It's been getting less money than it got long, long time ago. And that's just not wise budgeting and not wise policy. Higher education have, for some reasons, never been able to defend itself. And when the legislature comes around to talking about priorities, for some reason higher education can't seem to have the same force that some of the other budget priorities do. And it's hurt the state, and it will hurt the state. I'll tell you, as a college president, we had some students who came into the state, in the little place I used to run, and some students, and most of the students came from New Jersey. But in general, the people who went there stayed in the state. The people who go to other states often stay in that state. We have been losing some of our brightest and the best. When I was in graduate school, in teachers' college, I used to call New Jersey the cuckoo bird state. And what did they mean? Well, a cuckoo bird lays its eggs in other people's nests. And New Jersey did that to its students. It's still doing that to its students. We're still exporting much larger number of students than we should. We have a very wise policy in this state, which includes independence along with public education when we have bond issue, when we have appropriations from the state, and that is it should be, because the independent sector is a very important sector. But I found it remarkable when I wrote the education report for the governor, and by the way, there is an advocate now for higher education. It's in the governor's office. We've made that reform, and there is somebody speaking up for higher education right next to the governor. But when I went around, I was really amazed at the progress that the state colleges have made, in spite of this defunding. I mean, you go to some of these, not only Montclair, of course, that we all know about, but if you go to Ramapo, if you go to Stockton, enormous improvements and enormous capabilities, but they're accepting now a very small number of those who apply because they haven't got the room. So we've got to reinvest in higher education, I believe, because it's the future of the state. We've got to keep the brightest and the best here. And I think that means investing both in public and independent, but putting the higher education system back in the equation, so we're not just increasing tremendously as we have over the years money for K through 12, but also making sure a lot of the investment also goes into higher education.
Governor McGreevey. And then we'll have time for one more question.
Sure, John, I'd also...
Let me ask this question. What's wrong with the concept of when you buy something, you pay for it? What's wrong with that concept?
Okay, we'll have one more question after that.
But I'd also like, in addition to talking about higher education, I think we need to recognize that the present model that we employ is not responsive to all of our children. Many of our children will not pursue higher education. If you look at whether the German model, the Israeli model, that they provide for alternatives for people that are going into the crafts, moving into technology. And some of our best schools, most entrepreneurial schools, are schools that provide for young individuals that aren't pursuing a traditional liberal arts college degree. And so I think that needs to be as much a part of the equation at the table in the policy discussion.
Question over, and this is the last question we'll be able to get to.
We've talked a lot about education, but I'd like to talk a little bit about health care. And can you share what your thoughts are on the governor's defunding of Planned Parenthood, knowing that many of you continued to fund it during your terms, and how the impact of the defunding is hurting some of our residents now?
Well, unfortunately, you see this happening across the country. Planned Parenthood has become a symbol for the issue of abortion. And frankly, that's not what their job is. And they provide basic women's health care for a number of women who otherwise can't afford it. Fortunately, in the state of New Jersey, we do have a lot of alternative providers. There are other providers who can do this. It's not like the state of Kansas, for instance, where the Planned Parenthood is the only provider of women's health care services, mammograms, pap tests, things like that, for the rural communities of which most of Kansas is rural, and where many of these women live. I can't speak to what the impact is specifically here on women's access to health, prenatal care, to planning for your family, to the same degree that I don't think the impact is as great. I just bemoan the defunding. I can't second guess a governor's priorities on the budget, because it's difficult. We've all dealt with budgets. We've had to make difficult cuts. We understand that in order to balance a budget and you have to make cuts, it's not fun, it's not pleasant, and you're going to upset some people. This is an issue that I feel strongly about, because I think it's so important for women to have access to care. There's no question about it. And I just hope that in this state we have enough other sources that can step up and fill the vacuum, because there really will be a vacuum, and that has a bad impact on families, frankly.
Do others want to, before we close? No, I think we're good. Well, I want to thank this panel, and I'm sure you all extend that as well. I just want you all to know they will be appearing in Delaware next week, and hopefully I can come along for the ride. But thank you all very much for this. And in our closing comments, Brendan Byrne, NJPAC board member, is going to say a few words.
Thank you, John. I'm Brendan Byrne. I'm the managing partner of the New York Metro practice for PwC. And it's a pleasure to be here. I think the opportunity to close this is a special one as a board member, and to hear from our esteemed group here, the governors of this great state. I am a Jersey boy, so born and raised in Piscataway, New Jersey. I do run our Metro practice, but I moved from New Jersey to New York to take over New York, so you might feel good about that. And it is a great practice, but as a board member, it really is special to have these types of opportunities under John's leadership. And on behalf of all the board members of the NJPAC, I'd like to thank the governors for participating today and sharing their views. And I think, if you think about some of the topics that were covered today, and we got to one at the end, which is healthcare, really critical topics, education, competitiveness of the state. But certainly when you think about what the urban centers are challenged with, what we as leaders in different businesses and parts of the community are challenged with, changing that cycle is very, very difficult. And the only way to do that is through education and by people giving back. So we at PwC give back often. We don't give $10 to everybody who shows up. Unfortunately, we can't do that. We're not a bank. But I did turn it over to the NJPAC as a good board member, so I would encourage everybody to do that as well today. But it is important for everybody to be engaged on these topics, either through the political process or through giving back from a community standpoint and trying to help deal with some of the urban challenges that New Jersey and other cities and states face. So I'd like to thank you again for your participation. This event would not have happened if it weren't for Ruthie, so we'd like to thank Ruthie for pulling it together. And the NJPAC, which is a great organization, and I am privileged to represent our firm, and we've been supporting the NJPAC since its founding, I guess, over 15 plus years ago. In that capacity, we've had someone on the board for a long time. It's an honor to be on the board. It's a great institution. We do take our mission seriously, which is to try and convene sessions like this to bring people together on important topics, and this is certainly one of those days. And then in New Jersey, just so you know, in case you don't, we're over 1,400 strong. employees in New Jersey, PwC. So it's a very large practice serving most of the major companies and emerging companies in New York, in New Jersey. I do say that in New York as well from time to time. But it is a great place for us from a business standpoint. We do think competitiveness is very, very important, and the tax structure is certainly part of that. And so we certainly hope our current governor and future leaders will make sure that we remain as competitive as we are today and into the future, so we can continue to operate as a great state. So this summit is great. We look forward to your participation at other events. There's great performances here at the PAC we would invite you to participate in, and the Business Partners Roundtable, and any other events. So on behalf of the board, again, I'd like to thank each of you for joining us today and turn it back over to John.
Okay, thank you. I just want to acknowledge two other folks who are in the room. I could acknowledge everybody because everybody's a high-profile person, but I didn't say hello and thanks to Pi Chubb, who is here, who's one of our great founding board members. And if you have been to the Victoria Theater, which is our beautiful 500-seat theater, that's really the Pi Chubb Theater. So thank you for your great service to us and Victoria's great work in education in Newark. I also want to acknowledge, is he here? Yeah, there he is. This is a great man over to my right. He is the CEO of the Liberty Science Center, and his name is Paul Hoffman. Please stand up. And if we do a good job on arts education, he does a spectacular job on science learning and science education. And if you haven't been there lately, go. It's a remarkable place. Thank you all for coming. Take your goodie bags, because in your goodie bags is not only did Sunbank, thank you, sir, you know, the $10, but we have $25 gift certificates to our restaurant, Nico, so we hope you'll go there, and we hope you'll check out the new season, which we are really proud of, and we hope to see you often here at the Arts Center. Thanks for coming. And thank you, governors.
Happy days.